Hello there, and many thanks for joining us on this fresh episode of Africa Business Weekly as we take you through some of the biggest conversations that shaped the business landscape across sub-Saharan Africa over the course of this week. I'm Aki Obake. Our focus from West Africa this week explores Africa's development dynamics as we unpack a report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. From East Africa, we bring you talk points from meetings in Kigali, Rwanda, with institutional investors from sovereign wealth funds across the continent on ways to mobilize more private capital and institutional investment into the continent. It's now time to get the details of all of this and more as we begin with our first crossing to Palesa for regional updates from the Southern Africa region. Hello, Palesa.
Earlier this week, the US-Africa Summit kicked off, putting the spotlight on efforts enhancing African value chains while discovering pathways to global financing. My colleague Fifi Peters, who was at the summit, caught up with Ramachandran Otapatu, Chief Executive Officer for the Choppies Group, to unpack global business needs. For more, let's watch.
Initially, during the pandemic days, yes, we had skyrocketing prices and inflation, added with the Ukraine war. Also, it created a lot of short supplies and prices started rising significantly. But recently, the Botswana government have done a few things which ease up the inflation. One is reducing the fuel price by significantly. Tupula, last couple of weeks ago, they got a reduction in the food prices, and they removed VAT on a few items as well. That really helped in reducing the situation. I'm not saying that inflation have subdued completely, but the spiraling of the inflation had a positive impact with these measures. Right. And another factor for Botswana is the weakening rand, because most of the commodities are coming from South Africa. So the weakening rand, a stronger pula, also eases up the inflation to some extent.
Yeah, great for consumers over in Botswana, of course, not so great for South Africans, and we are smiling at the fact that the rand is trying to stage a bit of a comeback, but it's not on its best levels as yet. But you are here at this high-level business and government meeting, and I'd like to understand what your purpose in attending the US-Africa Business Summit is, so what you're hoping to achieve.
We are doing a presentation tomorrow in the summit with partnership with Prosper Africa and AWS. Okay, we feel that we see this as a great opportunity for the companies and businesses around in Africa, especially the sub-Saharan Africa. Botswana government have opened up a great opportunity by hosting the summit here, and there will be a lot of deals will be signed between the governments and between the private sector and the companies across the globe. This is a great opportunity, and I think most of the companies are making use of it. It's Prosper Africa is doing a great job, along with all the multinationals coming from the US and across Africa as well.
And is Choppies hoping to be a signatory in one or some of the deals that you made reference to that could be signed here?
We're trying to do an app through the blockchain technology. We're trying to bring in the farmers and the retailers and the financiers together through the technology. That's what we are proposing. We hope to see some significant improvement in the farmer's life in the countries we operate, like Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe and Namibia, as well as some funding help for the farmers through the DFIs operating in the region.
Sure. So essentially talking to a level of partnership and collaboration, and I'm glad that you made reference to financiers, because my next question was, what would you need to make the app that you're talking about that ultimately will hopes to increase food security? What will you need to make it happen? You mentioned funding. How much?
The ideal situation should be that the DFIs come in and help the farmers from the initial stages. We do help the farmers in the midway. Okay, that's we are a retailer. We're not a funder, or we are not a financing agency, but we do help the selected farmers on selected products. But instead of that, if you get a DFI or financial institutions to come along with retailers like us, so that we can fund the journey of a farmer from the inception from the farm to the fork or from the farm to the shelf. Then that becomes very easy, and that will bring real prosperity to the continent. And that's what we want to see. The inclusive development starts with the farmers, and these are the very micro and small enterprises, which is adding value to the lives of the communities in the countries we operate.
African fintech unicorn InstaSwitch is reportedly in talks with Kenya's Equity Bank to follow the lender into the DRC, one of the fastest growing regions in Africa right now. To discuss this and the evolution of Africa's digital payments ecosystem, Makuli caught up with the InstaSwitch founder and group managing director, Michelle Elegbe. Let's listen in for more.
Well, InstaSwitch is currently executing a strategy that basically says we want to be in 4 regions in sub-Saharan Africa within 5 years. Currently, we are in East Africa with presence in Uganda and Kenya. And DRC just happens to be the next logical bet for us if we want to be in East Africa. We believe it's a very exciting market. We are currently exploring ways to set up shop in that particular country.
All right. Just a final question on this particular point. When will you be in the position to update the market on exactly what you decide as it pertains to the DRC?
I think within the next months, we should be able to do that. We're in serious discussions with key players in the market. So I think in about 3 months, we should be able to tell us where we are in a particular instance.
All right. We look forward to those developments. But shifting the focus on the evolution of digital payments. So fintech right now remaining one of the hotspot areas in attracting investment flows. It has been one of the fastest growing areas in inviting new capital, old capital to elevate the rates of growth that we've seen. But I'd just like a comment on that as a player who has been in the industry for such a long time, and especially with a cross-pollination, as it were, with telecoms operators now and retailers now also offering similar services as yourself and banks. Just a reflection on the state of the industry right now and how much room still remains for growth.
Well, first, let me quickly say that when the industry started, the objective was to ensure that payment is seamless on the continent. When we started, fintech was not a term that was being used, but today there are quite a lot of players in that space. As far as development is concerned, a lot has been achieved. But if you look at penetration, I would say for most markets in Africa, we are still less than 30% of penetration, and it's about 70% to go. And that 70% has to deal with the fight against cash. So the real competition for us is how do we reduce dependence on cash and do this more in a more electronic manner or in a more digitized manner. So that primarily is the objective. But I think what we have seen is that a lot of companies have come into the space, all contributing in various forms of partnership. But one ultimate goal that we all have is to reduce the dependence on cash and to make sure that payments can be done seamlessly across the continent.
Another area in terms of the move to a cashless society, as it were. So I'm here at the US-Africa Business Summit in Gaborone, and one of the conversations that will be had are about how to accelerate the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Area deal. And now what we have already seen, sir, is a few institutions who are playing their part in that and allowing for payments in multi-currencies, as it were, merchants to trade amongst each other within their respective currencies. I'd just like to understand how you see the opportunity of boosting intra-Africa trade and what this potentially means for your business.
I think it is a very welcome development. It is something we have all hoped for, and we like the direction that is being approached. For industry specifically, this is an area we have really thought about for many years. We currently have solutions that we have developed to take advantage of that opportunity. And in fact, we are part of the partners working with PAPS, the Pan-African Payment System.
That's it from the Southern Africa team. It's back to you.
Thanks for the update there, Palesa. Up next, we have Sarah on standby for more content from East Africa.
Well, thank you, Akin. Institutional investors from sovereign wealth funds across Africa are currently meeting in Kigali, Rwanda, to discuss ways to mobile more private capital and institutional investment into the continent. CNBC Africa's Julius Bizumungu spoke to Agaciro Development Fund CEO for more.
Accounts substantially for the cargo that comes through for the region. In 2021, I think the port of Mombasa did about 34.4 million tons of cargo, and Dar es Salaam did about 17 million. Those numbers haven't really changed much. The numbers in Mombasa have slightly gone up, so it's same to Dar es Salaam. So Mombasa is substantially the one that accounts for about 65% of the cargo that goes through the region.
Yeah, we've seen competition is rising steep. Mombasa, yes, might be the one doing volumes, heavy volumes comparing to other within the region. But do you think this will be on for long? Because we're seeing Dar es Salaam is also coming in heavy.
I was in Dar es Salaam about 2 months ago. They have done quite a bit of investments. Substantially, a lot of investments in terms of upgrading the systems, upgrading the facilities within the port and even the equipment. However, ports are known for efficiency. So they're basically, we look at them in terms of efficiency. How efficient is one port to the other? What are the costs in terms of the levies that are levied in each of the ports? There has been a substantial competition. We had seen Mombasa losing a bit to the port of Dar es Salaam towards between August and November, up to December of last year, and slightly around January. However, Mombasa started gaining because of two things. One, the stability now that we have in the port of Mombasa in terms of leadership, because that has been a problem for about 2 years, where the leadership in terms of the CEO, the chairs, there have been changes a lot of acting. So some decisions that we required to be done were not done, but at least now we have a substantive MD in Mombasa. And what he has done, because the issues, I've been in charge of the region, the 6 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and DRC, as through the Northern Corridor, where I sat in as the representative for private sector in the board. And the conversations that I had with those countries, the business community in those countries, and even the government in those countries, there are challenges that we are facing around efficiency, around cost, about multiple charges that are charged on trucks that are ferrying cargo. A lot of those issues have been sorted out. One, government has been responsive. They have responded to our issues that we raised. And two, the Port of Mombasa, the issues that they were complaining about, especially for Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, were about the free period that is provided for their cargo, which I think has been adjusted now. Captain has been able to go around and adjust those, just to catch up with not as much as what Dar es Salaam offers. The reason why Dar es Salaam offers longer free period is because of comparatively, Mombasa is far much more efficient in terms of dwell time, in terms of turnaround time for the ships, and the space that it has for storage of cargo.
Kenya's capital, Nairobi, is betting big as the city gears up to become a smart city, which promises to double jobs and increase revenue collection. CNBC Africa had a conversation with Victor Otieno for more.
That the Nairobi County is trying to solve through the leadership of His Excellency the Governor, Sakaja, is we want to be able to support job creation. If you look at statistics, from World Bank, etc., we see that we have over 1 million young people or graduates who are coming into the labor market. And Kenya, or Nairobi specifically, has a poverty rate of over 30%. So we believe that the supporting innovation and supporting the startup ecosystem would be a good way in which we can be able to support a significant socio-economic development in the country. And so through the leadership of the governor, a new sector was created called Innovation and Digital Economy. And under that we have my subsector, which I lead, which is called Digital Economy and Startups. And the whole program or the whole activities that we have at the county is programs that would allow different stakeholders within the startup ecosystem to be supported, of course with the ultimate goal of ensuring that we are able to support our innovative young people in the county.
African cities, including Nairobi, are literally trying to mainstream ICT and position ICT as a key hub. As Nairobi being the capital of Kenya, what sort of initiatives are you taking on board to accelerate growth of the ICT sector?
If you look at ICT, generally falls within the innovation ecosystem. So looking at KNBS specifically and looking at economic growth, we see ICT being an enabler of the economy in terms of directly, of course, contributing towards GDP, but as well as being able to enable other sectors to be able to grow. So let's say, for example, if you have a computer, using a computer, you can be able to increase your efficiency in terms of increasing revenue. So that's the role that ICT in itself has played within the country, and of course this is a global phenomenon. So we believe that we can be able to harness this ecosystem, expand it, give it, create an enabling environment, give support to the different stakeholders that play within the innovation space. And of course we believe through these programs, then probably we can be able to expand the sector. So as a county government, of course, we are looking at raising the profile of the innovation ecosystem of the capital, which is Nairobi City. We are looking to train a lot of our youth around ICT, of course, so that ultimately we can be producers of technology rather than consumers. We are looking to decentralize resources for innovation for our young people, so that we can be able to have, incubation centers or centers of excellence within our ward. So looking at Nairobi County, it's divided administratively into 85 wards. So our theory of change is that if we're able to bring these resources closer home to the young people in terms of internet, in terms of space, in terms of capacity building, then probably they can be able to play a bigger role in the digital economy and innovation. So with that approach, then it means that, of course, we can be able to create jobs. Lastly, we are holding what we're calling the Innovate Nairobi Technology Week, between the 7th and 11th of August. And the idea is not just to have an event, is to be able to use it as a place to reflect, to look at the challenges that we face as an ecosystem. Just have policy co-creation conversations. Because if you look at ICT and innovation generally, we see terms around artificial intelligence. We hear terms around IoT. These are very difficult terms that from a policy perspective, we have a challenge in terms of how do you create an enabling environment or regulation to be able to support this. So we believe that through co-creation of policy, then probably we can be able to create a better regulatory environment for the ecosystem players to thrive. Looking at ICT generally, and of course we have a new sector called Smart Nairobi, and we've seen His Excellency the President also say that we want to be able to automate government services. Because you can look at it in terms of direct contribution to GDP, but you can also look at it from the perspective of the cost saving of having an efficient government.
Well, that's all from me now. It's back to you.
Many thanks, Sarah. It's now time to bring you highlights from West Africa. A report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says low investor confidence and high cost of capital are holding back investments in Africa more than any other world region. It adds that investors are more attentive to macroeconomic and political risks. We had an exclusive chat with Ellen Anadeter, a director at OECD Development Center, to unpack the findings and recommendations in this report. Take a listen.
Institutions, stable macroeconomic policies. They can work with international partners and African civil society to mobilize investments towards Agenda 23 and sustainable development. And with our colleagues in the Africa Union Commission, who are co-authors and co-producers of this report, we identified three things that governments should be doing with their international partners, and you referred to it: the need for better data and information, the institutions that assess the risks for investors, like the credit rating agencies,
Yes.
they don't have enough data or good enough data to work with. So we recommend that governments and foreign partners should invest in African national statistical institutions, and that the investment promotion agencies and regulators should do a better job of providing detailed, up-to-date information in formats that are easy to use, and to strengthen the African financial institution, because there is, as I mentioned before, there is a lot of capital in Africa. The African pension funds, they hold $380 billion, or in 2020 they held that in financial assets, but only 3% goes to infrastructure or green or sustainable assets of the continent. There's potential. And then the third policy recommendation is to strengthen the regional integration and accelerate the creation of an African single market,
Yes.
and make increase the market, but also make it more resilient to external shocks.
And talking about that resilience as well, Africa does not necessarily have control over the external shocks that impact how well we see the continent improving away from the narrative of conflict, of COVID, and also of climate change at this point in time. But in terms of building that resilience, what are some of the points you're highlighting in terms of your recommendations as well, for the fact that we understand there's a current liquidity squeeze, there's the call for change towards the global financial architecture to work for Africa, to throw that spotlight towards Africa. In terms of resilience, how do we better mitigate the shocks?
Like I said before, strengthening African capabilities, strengthening regional integration. We could see, for example, with COVID-19, that was the wake-up call on the importance for Africa to focus deeper on its own strength. And what do I mean by regional value chains? By developing that to be less dependent on international markets. You mentioned climate adaptation, for example, to be better prepared for external shocks. We can think of examples. Weather sensors to predict extreme weather events, to have micro-insurance, more efficient irrigation in agriculture, etc. And then on the financial side, we can also think of to have more innovative financial tools like green bonds. They're important to raise money for African governments and African financial institutions. For example, if you look at North Africa, the multi-stakeholder consultation and regulatory reform enabled Egypt and Morocco to mobilize over $1 billion through green bonds in issuance in a number of years. So more countries need to follow.
Up next, a report by the Food and Agriculture Organization shows that over 783 million people faced hunger in 2022 across the world, and forecast over 600 million persons will be chronically undernourished by 2030. In reaction to this, Oxfam International says governments must support small-scale food producers and promote especially the rights of women farmers, who are key in the fight against global hunger. Fatin Hassan, the Africa Director at Oxfam International, describes the current food crisis on the continent as unacceptable. Take a listen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, David. I think this report really shows how, the consequences of having leaders who prioritize profits of a few companies over the well-being and the lives of billions of people, literally. As you mentioned, here in Somalia, in Somaliland, in this country, they haven't seen a good rain in 2 years. This is more or less 5 failed rain seasons. And this drought has pushed, people to move around in search of water. They're not able to stay in one place to produce the food that they need. And this is leading 1 out of 3 Somalians to face a more or less level of hunger. So this is a very complicated situation that we're seeing not only in Somalia or Somaliland, but we're also seeing it in the rest of the Eastern African continent, and moreover, in the rest of the continent. You mentioned this report from FAO. What we can see is that Latin America, Asia are able to get hunger under control to some points. They're making progress in terms of hunger figures, but in Africa, it's still on the rise, and this is really unacceptable.
And talking about that rise here, we're also seeing forecasts that global food prices will remain high at historic levels till next year. In terms of the utilization now at the helm of affairs, climate-smart initiatives, when we are talking about food production and processing across that value chain, what are some of the fault lines you think African leaders are not necessarily paying keen attention to? We are having a whole lot of call for increased inflows in terms of climate financing, but if we don't get it right at home and have a clear agenda, then it faults our call for increased inflows, wouldn't you say?
You're totally right, David. I can only recall the Malabo commitment where the 54 heads of state at the time committed to invest 10% of their national budget into agriculture. This was to end hunger by 2025. And we can see that only a handful of countries have fulfilled this commitment. So we are absolutely not on track to beat hunger by 2025. We are calling African governments to prioritize agriculture, to make sure that climate-smart agriculture is supported, to make sure that smallholder farmers, especially women, are supported, because they are the ones, producing 70% of the food that is consumed on the continent. We are also looking at solutions to make sure that they have more disposable income or free income in order to invest this money into agriculture. Making sure that debt is under control. We have called rich countries to reorganize, to restructure, or to cancel even debt that African countries owe. We are also looking at, these major corporations making a lot of profit everywhere in the world, and in Africa in particular. Only last year, they made $306 billion. They doubled their profits, and they doubled their profits last year alone. So there's money. The resources are here, it's just not invested properly. So African countries should be able to tax these corporations operating in the continent.
And on that note, it's a wrap on this week's show. Many thanks to Palesa and Sarah for the regional updates. Do catch us same time next week for more exciting conversations. I'm Akin Obakeye. Enjoy your weekend.